But it leads to the need for collaborating and working together and forming a consensus and making decisions that please more people. And often those decisions are longer lasting and are actually sort of have a better and a longer term result, which means that you have less of this sort of chopping and changing of one government gets in, makes a load of policy decisions, and then an opposing government comes in a few years later, wipes it all out, starts again, and does something completely different.
Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today we have Emma Knaggs, who is the grassroots leader of Make Votes Matter. Emma, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Josh. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks very much for agreeing to chat to me.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
No problem. So why don't you give us a brief explanation of who Make Votes Matter are?
Absolutely. So Make Votes Matter is the campaign for proportional representation in the House of Commons. So we are essentially campaigning to change the voting system so that seats match votes and all votes are counted equally. We've existed since just after the 2015 general election, which is still one of the most disproportionate elections that we've had here in the UK. And it was really an activist called Owen Winter, who at the time was 16 years old. He set up a change.org petition, which ultimately got about 250,000 signatures petitioning for a change to the voting system to PR. From that, a sort of knot of volunteers coalesced around the campaign, and we've built up from there over the past sort of, nearly 6 years now, and have become a much larger campaign. We still have quite a small team, but we have an awful lot of supporters and activists and volunteers that work with us to really sort of campaign to change the voting system here in the UK.
Okay, so you mentioned there that in our current system, a lot of votes aren't counted equally. Do you want to explain, just for people who aren't well versed in it, like why that is?
Yeah. So the system that we use at the moment is called firstpastthepost. And basically, it means that each constituency in the UK, there are 650 of them, essentially has a mini election in every single constituency. And the winner of that mini election goes to Parliament. And all of the losers, if you were to say, anyone who voted for someone that didn't win, their vote just goes nowhere. So, for example, if you are a Conservative voter in a Labour seat that has always been a Labour seat and is pretty much guaranteed that a Labour MP would be returned, or if you are a Labour voter in an SNP seat, for example, in Scotland, your vote just goes nowhere. It's essentially wasted. So we really feel, obviously, that this is quite an unfair system. It means that not every vote counts. And it really does depend on your postcode, where you live, whether the vote that you cast at the ballot box every time is actually going to affect the result and end up with you being represented in Parliament by somebody that you voted for or not.
Okay, so when I was interviewing Peter Hitchens, we actually briefly touched on the concept of PR, and he argued that first past the post actually has some virtues in that it provides clarity, and it provides like you're more likely to end up with a majority government, essentially, even in a divided country. And he was expressing that as a virtue of our system, that it gives us a stronger government than perhaps our population can decide for themselves. Like, what would be your sort of counterpoint to that?
Yeah, a lot of people make this point that it leads to stable governments. I would say in the past 5 years, we haven't really had much of a stable government in the UK. We have not exactly been a shining beacon of stable governments. The government that we have does have a parliamentary majority, but only 44% of people actually voted for them. So they do not have a majority support of the people. And they don't reflect, or the decisions that are made within government don't necessarily reflect public opinion. And we've seen this quite often recently with things, for example, like free school meals, where there was huge public support for offering free school meals to children who needed them, and the government voted it down over and over again. So it may be that there is a majority government with the majority of seats, but in our case at the moment, or it's actually very rare for there to be a majority of support, and they don't reflect the people that they are representing. So with a PR system, for example, you're right, it doesn't often happen that there is a majority government. It happened in New Zealand in the most recent elections. It's possible that it may happen in Scotland as well. There's some elections happening, hopefully in May this year, if they actually go ahead. But it leads to the need for collaborating and working together and forming a consensus and making decisions that please more people. And often those decisions are longer lasting and are actually sort of have a better and a longer term result, which means that you have less of this sort of chopping and changing of one government gets in, makes a load of policy decisions, and then an opposing government comes in a few years later, wipes it all out, starts again and does something completely different. Whereas with this collaborative politics, it means that you get better decisions longer term. It may take longer to make those decisions, but ultimately they should last longer and please more people.
Mm. So you're basically suggesting that like a coalition government or coalition governments successively is providing like a more consistent and sort of less volatile political environment, is sort of allows more for long-term planning rather than, as you said, chopping and changing.
Yeah, and actually you can see this in the most stable countries in the world, which are invariably a combination of the Scandinavian countries plus Switzerland. All of them have systems of PR. So this argument to say that it leads to stable governments, actually, if you look at the most stable countries in the world, almost all of them use a form of PR and have done for many years, and it works very well for them.
Okay, so then I guess the next question is got to be like, what system do we go towards? From what country are we going to take examples, or what system do you guys advocate for, sort of specifically, if at all?
So at Make Votes Matter, we actually brokered what we call our Good Systems Agreement, which is an agreement where we've had all of the British opposition parties, apart from Labour, sign up to it, plus a few sort of MPs. And it essentially sets out 10 principles of a good voting system. So we don't advocate one single system, because even though there are examples in other countries, basically each country has its own sort of bespoke system. There are sort of types of models and things. So we think that with the UK, it's good to sort of take aspects of things, but there are sort of 10 principles that we cover: that it must be proportional, votes must be equal, it must be allow diversity, it must maintain a constituency link as well, because this is always something that comes up a lot in arguments against PR. There are forms of PR where you can have a constituency link. And ultimately, we think that the system for the UK should be decided via a deliberative process like a citizens' assembly, so that it can be part of a national conversation with a representative sort of audience of the country to discuss exactly which is the system or how we want our voting system to work going forwards.
So you actually mentioned that Labour haven't signed up, which is really interesting, because I think it's coming on close to 200 constituency Labour parties have signed up to either voting reform or proportional representation. I cannot for the life of me remember which one it is. But why do you think it is that Labour haven't signed up to it? I mean, I can see the Conservatives' argument not to, but why do you think Labour haven't specifically?
It's a difficult one to answer, because actually they're the only sort of socialist party, if you want to use that word, in the world that supports first past the post. So it is a little bit of an anomaly. But like you say, we've polled Labour members several times now. Very consistently, about 3/4 of Labour members all support a move to PR. We're working with, so we launched a coalition of various organisations, including Make Votes Matter, but also the Electoral Reform Society, Compass, Another Europe is Possible, the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform. And all of these organisations are working together, exactly like you say, to get CLPs to put motions forward to the Labour Party conference, which will be this September, hopefully, if it's going ahead. And exactly like that, there is now huge pressure within the Labour Party membership to get this policy changed, because it's very much in the interests of everybody, not just, it's not really a party politics question. PR would benefit pretty much everybody in the country. But in order for it to become law, because essentially that is what it needs to happen, it has to go through Parliament at some point to change the law, we need the support of one of the two bigger parties. And like you say, it's much more likely that the Labour Party will change their policy in favour of PR rather than the Conservatives. So we are having, hopefully this year, having a big push to get Labour Party policy to change to support PR.
How hopeful are you for that? Like, what do you think the chances are that they go for it? Because I mean, I've seen arguments from senior Labour politicians that they say, look, you know, we just need one more push and we'll get over the line and then we'll be back in power. And so therefore they think that their best chance for like getting back into power is to stick with first past the post.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I can say is there is a huge amount of momentum within the Labour Party membership. Sorry, momentum is maybe not the right word to choose, but there's a huge amount of support for it within the Labour Party membership. Labour does describe itself as a very democratic party, and that hopefully the views of the membership and such an overwhelming amount of support from that area will translate into them finally supporting PR and be the change we need, really.
So like how do you see this going? Like so like, say hypothetically you get the Labour Party on board, and then you're looking in Parliament to try and get this passed. Like, do you see them attempting to use some form of citizens' assembly, as you mentioned? Like, do you think we'd go for another referendum like we did with the alternative vote? Or how would you see this like how do we get to that point where we can make those changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So our ideal sort of timeline or scenario would be for the Labour Party to back PR hopefully this year. And then if we do have time to have a citizens' assembly before the next general election, to be able to do that groundwork and have all those conversations, by then it means that all of the British opposition parties will have policy in support of PR. So hopefully we'll be able to get a lot of engagement at high level to have that national conversation, to do the work, to have a recommendation of what sort of PR would be good for the UK, and then have that included in the manifestos of all those parties, and then go to the next general election with all of that support and a commitment to introducing PR in the first session of Parliament. And then obviously if a government that supports PR is elected, that should be enough of an electoral mandate to be able to initiate the processes to be able to get the law changed to that to PR, basically.
Mm. Have you spoken to current politicians about how receptive they are to the idea of a citizens' assembly, just generally? Because I mean, it's something that I've heard mentioned from quite a number of people that I have interviewed. It's an idea that keeps sort of popping up everywhere that I read any sort of book or paper about trying to change our system. And it's like, in theory, it's such a fantastic idea. I think it's really, really, like, quite possibly one of the best ways forward to deal with a lot of the difficult issues that we're currently going to have to deal with in the next sort of 5 to 10 years as a nation. But ideally it should be like really appealing to politicians, because it kind of gets them off the hook of having made the decision. You know, do you know what I mean? They can just be like, well, it was your choice, you know. They can throw their hands up and pretend that they had nothing to do with it. But like, how receptive are politicians to this idea of sort of taking away their power, essentially?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is one of the key principles of the Good Systems Agreement that we brokered, and all of the parties that have signed up to that have essentially committed to this citizens' assembly.
Mm.
So there are almost all of the opposition parties, like I say, but there are also individual Labour MPs that have put their name to it and supported this as well. So we spent about 18 months brokering this deal and making sure that everyone was on board with it, and spent an awful lot of time tweaking the language, making sure that it was really something that everybody could get on board with, and that sort of covered all of the bases, and that really, if they've signed our Good Systems agreements, they should all be on board with the Citizens Assembly idea.
Mm. Well, I mean, hopefully we get some sort of progress on our voting system. Do
Mm-hmm.
you, so to move on to the House of Lords and sort of the second chamber idea, like is this like, where do Make Votes Matter stand on the second chamber?
So we're a single issue campaign, and we're very much focused on the House of Commons. So we really see the House of Commons as the keystone in reforming politics in general in the UK. So unless the House of Commons is fully democratic with a proper proportional system, other reforms are just sort of tinkering around with the edges, and we really think that it needs to start in the House of Commons and then move down to other aspects. So that can include the House of Lords, that could include local government as well. And but there are other campaigns, like for example the Electoral Reform Society. They're campaigning for Lords reform as well, and there are other campaigns, and we work closely with them as well. But Make Votes Matter is single issue, and we really think that reforming the House of Commons is the key to reforming the whole democratic system, basically.
Mm. You mentioned some Labour MPs are on board. Who
Mm-hmm.
do you know specifically?
Clive Lewis is one of our most sort of vocal um, supporters. Stephen Kinnock, Jonathan Reynolds, Dawn Butler. Sorry, I nearly got her name wrong. So we've got roughly, I think it's under the last sort of House of Parliament Labour Party, we had about a third of Labour MPs that were sort of officially supportive of our campaign. So we are working to try and determine those that we don't know what their opinions are, and also to sort of help convert as many as possible.
Hmm. So what is your job involve as the grassroots organizer or the?
Yeah. So we have three strands of our campaign. Grassroots, which is the area that I head up. So that's really anything to do with our supporters, volunteers, activists, things like action days, things like local groups, things like trying to get letters into our local press and all that sort of thing. So it's very much the grassroots side of the campaigning, and getting normal everyday people to get involved in the campaign. Lobbying MPs as well is a really important part of the grassroots campaigning, and we have a virtual lobby of Parliament happening on the 12th of March. So we're asking our supporters to invite their MPs for a little Zoom meeting on the Friday, the 12th of March, to try and have a conversation with them about PR. And then the other two strands of the campaign are the Labour Party side, which we've spoken about already, and then the Alliance, which is really about bringing on board MPs, other societies, parties, public figures, really to sort of raise the campaign in national media or any other sort of thing, to really sort of highlight the need for PR across the country, really.
Hmm. So is this really what the public want? I mean, like I mean, some people would say that we had our chance in, was it 2015? I believe the referendum was, and the public sort of quite wholeheartedly rejected alternative vote as a new voting system. Like, what is the, do you have polling on the sort of prevailing sentiment of the British public?
Yeah. So the referendum was 2011, and the key
2011,
thing
sorry,
to
yeah.
sort of, that's right. The key thing about that is that AV, or the alternative votes, is not a proportional system. So even David Cameron admitted that it would not have a proportional result, and actually if the 2015 election had been using AV, it would be even less proportional than it had been under first past the post. But yes, we do. We've done polling occasionally. We tend to sort of focus it a bit more, but there is support in the general population. I can't remember the exact numbers, I'm afraid, but it is there. And it really is, we're trying to sort of do the work to get this out into wider conversations and make it the bigger story than it is, because it's viewed as quite a technical conversation, or quite a nerdy thing to talk about, when actually, ultimately, if we were to have PR, a lot of the things that people care about in general, like improving equality, whether that's income equality, gender equality, social equality, things like dealing with the climate crisis, things like stopping this really confrontational Yabu politics that causes a lot of this division in society. Those things could be improved through working on PR in the collaborative way that we were talking about. So yeah, it's trying to get that message out so that the wider population sort of understands that a lot of those things would trickle down from a change in the voting system.
So you really think that first past the post is the reason for the kind of polarization over the last sort of 5 to 10 years?
Well, if you think about the most polarized countries at the moment, many of them do use first past the post. For example, the USA is quite hot at the moment.
Oh, what do you
Um,
mean? They all agree on everything.
well, actually, it's a very live example of undoing all the things that had been done by the previous government. So, as you can
Yeah.
see, Joe Biden has just spent the last 10 days undoing everything that Donald Trump has done.
Yeah.
So, this is a very live example. We haven't had a big change of government in this country for at least 10 years. But I'm not saying that
40
PR is the
years if
magic.
you're going to be really cynical.
But I'm not going to say PR is the magic bullet. It's not suddenly going to cure all our ills and make us live in a utopic society. But you have to look at examples of other countries. For example, almost all European countries use some form of PR, and they are our closest neighbours, our closest allies, and culturally, I would say they're some of our closest comparisons. And there's over 80% of sort of developed nations all use a type of PR. So really, first past the post is quite an out of date, outmoded system. And it really is time for the UK to sort of come into even the 20th century. It's not even the 21st century, and just sort of get up to speed with some of the countries that are doing better than us, frankly, in a lot of the sort of rankings of various uh, rankings in the world. We are not as high as we could be.
Yes.
Did I answer the question? Was there something else? I feel like there was a two-part question to that.
No, not really. I mean, the next thing I wanted to kind of point out was like I'm not sure that proportional voting systems automatically sort of help out in trying to make the politics less polarized. I mean, being from Northern Ireland, the
Yeah.
we have arguably one of the most proportional voting systems in the world, and we are still horrendously divided. I mean, not quite along the same lines as the rest of the UK. We have our own thing going on here, orange versus green. But our system essentially works, for people who don't know, in that we get like a list of candidates who are standing in a certain constituency, and then we get a certain number of candidates that are elected from each constituency, and we have to number preferences, like 1 to however many people are on the list, and then they count them through, like they count the first preference votes, and then when the first preference votes are counted, if anyone's over the threshold that's required to get a seat, then you go to the second. Yeah. Anyway, it's not the most simple system in the world, but we still are like horrendously divided and polarized along I mean, it's not exactly religious lines. It's more sort of Irish versus, are we Irish versus are we British lines? Like, I mean, yeah, I guess I'm keen to sort of point out that like it doesn't always lead to the best outcome. I mean, do you guys, how do you guys feel about PR STV, or would you prefer some sort of list system?
Well, talking about the sort of divisions in society as well, they are not all down to a voting system, and a voting system isn't going to fix all of them. For example, in Ireland, a lot of those divisions are historically about, and changing the voting system is not going to magically fix things like that. I grew up in Belgium, which has used PR since the 1800s, and they're a very fragmented society as well. There've long been sort of confrontations and things like that over various topics, but think of it the opposite way around. If those countries had first past the post, where you would have a dominant force with a minority support, then that might actually exacerbate some of those divisions rather than trying to sort of smooth them out. So if the alternative is first past the post, then it might actually have been worse. But anyway, but yes, like I said, with MBM doesn't like push a single voting system, just because not that many people are that interested in the details of the voting system. It's quite a sort of technical and
What?
nerdy conversation.
Oh, you've never heard people down the pub debating PR versus a list system?
Versus STV versus AMS.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also the thing at the moment is that certain parties also support certain systems as well. So it's a way of trying to not get into the detail and the sniping about those sort of details of things, and just we support the principle of PR, and we think with our good systems agreements there's a good system that can be decided upon for the UK, but we're not going to be drawn on one system or another.
It's funny actually you mentioned Belgium. The whole Northern Ireland system is based on well, it's based on the Belgian system. What is the concept called? I'm going to butcher this. I think it's consociationalism.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a GCSE politics still in my head there.
Very good.
Yeah, but it's based on the idea of trying to bridge the divide between a seriously divided society, and trying to find a way to create a system in which you can govern a divided society, which is like, I mean, we seem to be heading that way. I mean, we're not quite as bad as America yet, but we're getting there.
Well, we need to turn back.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, like, I mean, I do believe there's still a road back. You know, I guess it's difficult to say these days. We can't hope for much more than get into the end of next week right now.
No, absolutely.
So you're gonna hopefully we get some sort of discussion on this from the Labour Party. Have you guys approached the Conservatives about this at all, or is that kind of just like a bridge too far? You just know they're never gonna sign up?
No, well, we're a fully cross-party campaign, so we do have supporters from the full political spectrum. We do have one Conservative MP who supports our campaign and has signed up to the Good Systems Agreement, and that's Derek Thomas, who's the MP for St Ives down in Cornwall. And we are trying to make inroads within the Conservative parties. I think personally at local level, there'll be a lot of Conservatives that support PR, particularly with their experiences in local councils, because although at the moment the Westminster Parliament has a majority Conservative government, the reverse will be true in certain councils. So I think there are Conservatives out there that are open to PR, definitely. And like I say, we definitely have Conservative supporters. I'd say the Parliamentary Conservative Party at the moment is very much a stone wall when it comes to that. They had it very clearly in their manifesto that they supported first past the post, and many of our
They really put
supporters.
it in their manifesto.
Oh yeah, it's in there. Page 40 of the page 48 that everyone was talking about before the general election also had a commitment to first past the post on it. So yes, it was very clearly in there. And many of our supporters obviously do have Conservative MPs, and they have been lobbying them and trying to do it. And that's how Derek Thomas came on board, was by constituency lobbying by his own constituents. So people power does work, and by being persistent and opening up those conversations, it does work. But I have to say, it's a hard road with the Conservative MPs.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine the party of Jacob Rees-Mogg voting for any kind of significant change.
Well,
like it was
we'll see.
it was good enough for it was good enough in the 1800s. It's good enough for us now.
Yeah.
So do you think that so the last couple of years has seen us kind of drift from like there was a point in 2010 when it legitimately, for like a few brief moments, looked like the Lib Dems were in contention as a major political force. Like I think after the first TV debate that we did, then Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems were actually polling higher than Labour or the Conservatives for like a couple of days, and but then since then, especially since the coalition government sort of flattened them, we've seen just all of the voters sort of coalesce around either the Conservative or Labour. Do you think that a PR system would sort of help us like retreat from that a little bit? Would there be like more people like likely to vote for smaller parties, for the Green Party, or perhaps even new parties that are springing up? What's the one from Lawrence Fox? Reform UK, or is it no Reclaim? Reform's the Brexit party. Yeah. Reclaim UK. Like, do you think these smaller parties are going to would have more of a chance under PR, or would the sort of polarization that's occurred, would that sort of remain in place?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things with a PR system is that it eliminates the need for tactical voting. So possibly one of the reasons that there has been such a swing to larger parties is that tactical voting aspect. And I think at the last general election, about a third of people said that they were likely to vote tactically. So voting against a candidate that you don't want to get in, as opposed to for the candidate that you do support. So by having a proportional system where your vote is always represented, it means you can vote for the person that has closest to your views. So in theory, that would mean that people that support smaller parties but have felt forced to vote for a candidate that represents a larger party that has a better chance of winning in their constituency, that's where they will have moved their votes to. By having a fully representative system, there's no need to do that anymore. So you can vote for who you actually want to represent you. So in theory, that it improves the chances of smaller parties of being able to get seats in Parliament. And actually, the Lib Dems this time, their vote percentage increased, but they lost seats. So this is the sort of paradox of first past the post, where sometimes you can actually get a bigger vote share, but unfortunately, if your votes are not in the correct constituency, you end up losing seats. So, and this is quite the paradox. So I think where there is one Green MP, but that took over 860,000 votes to get that one Green MP, whereas for there to be one Conservative MP, it took about, I think it was about 32,000 votes to get a Conservative MP into Parliament. So the disproportionality of it is absolutely huge. And then the Brexit Party got 2% of the national vote and don't have a single MP in Parliament, which is just not representative, really.
Yeah, that's not good, actually. I mean, as much as the Brexit Party aren't probably the greatest representatives of democracy, they or well, maybe that's a poor way to put it, but maybe they're not the best people to elect as MPs. They like to pull a lot of stunts, like they did in the European Parliament, taking selfies with no one in there and claiming no one was working when they were all at lunch.
But if there's support for them in the country, then really those people who voted should be represented. I mean, in the 2015 election, UKIP received 4 million votes, and they got one MP, I think it was.
Yeah, Douglas Carswell.
Exactly, who had defected from the Conservatives. So he was initially voted in as a Conservative and then swapped to UKIP and got re-elected under a different banner. But yeah, if 4 million people vote for a particular party or a particular type, whether you agree with it or not, it is fair for those votes to be represented in Parliament, and they were not.
Well, that's a very fair point. So like say someone's listening and they're going, well, nothing will change, or there's no way we can get anyone to agree to this. It would be forcing politicians to give up some power, or especially in the two larger parties to agree to the chances that they would never ever receive a majority again. Like, what would you say to these sort of cynics?
Well, there's plenty of changes that have happened over the years that needed massive support. Things like civil rights, things like votes for women. That was 100 years ago, and that was voted down dozens of times over decades. And it doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing to do. But every time you could now not say that women should not have the votes, because surely they should have always had the vote, in my opinion. But then again, I guess I'm biased. Yeah, these are the sorts of things that really are required to make a better society. And it's, in our opinion, something like this would make a really big difference to a lot of the big issues that we have in our society at the moment. And even if it is voted down a few times, and even if it is against the interests of certain political parties, it's the right thing to do. And it's an improvement to our democratic system, and whether they agree with it or not, it really should happen.
Well, thankfully, politicians always do the right thing.
Eventually.
Well, eventually. But so, how can people try and get involved? Like, what would be the best things for people to do? Say they're thinking that, okay, this seems like a righteous cause.
Sign me up.
Like, sign me up. Like, what can they do aside from maybe sign up to your mailing list, or follow you on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot? Like, where can people begin that isn't, I don't know, like throwing bombs at the Parliament, or storming?
We don't advocate violence. So yeah, if you go to our website, so our website is makevotesmatter.org.uk. And probably the best thing to do right now, if you really want to do something worthwhile, is to sign up to join our Equal Votes lobby, which is happening on the 12th of March. So we're asking people to request a meeting with their MP, which will be on Zoom, just because of current restrictions. So far, we've got about 500 of our supporters have requested a meeting with their MP. We're trying to coordinate them so that they're hopefully group meetings. So if you're a little bit uncertain about meeting your MP face to face, hopefully we can encourage some of our supporters to join you in that constituency, so that you're not necessarily on your own if you're a bit unsure about having a Zoom if your MP happens to be Boris Johnson, for example. So that would be a great way to start. Also might help you to sort of meet a few supporters as well in your area, and meet some like-minded people that live close to where you are. If you're a Labour member as well, this is a really important time for anybody who's a member of the Labour Party. So our sort of Labour project is called Labour for a New Democracy. So we have a website for that as well, and you can sign up there and ideally pass a motion through your CLP to get Labour Party policy changed at the next conference. So they're the sort of two key things to really get involved in if you are interested.
Okay, right. Well, that seems like a nice place to leave it. Emma, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Lovely. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.